A homeless girl hands a flower to a young CEO crying on a park bench. Unknowingly, he is her real father. His $3,000 suit couldn't stop the tears from falling. Jason Miller sat on the worn wooden bench, loosened his navy tie, and took a deep breath. The park was almost empty that autumn afternoon. A few dry leaves danced in the wind, forming small whirlwinds that drifted aimlessly, just like his life. 32 years old, vice president of Miller & Associates, car of the year, downtown apartment, a bank account that would make anyone smile. But there he was, a grown man crying in public like a child. Jason looked at his phone once more. The message was still there. "Si, we need to discuss your future at the company. Dinner tonight, 8 p.m. Dad." He knew what that meant. More responsibilities, more hours at the office, less life. His father, Robert Miller, didn't build a financial empire by being patient with feelings. Business is business, he always repeated. And Jason, the only son and heir, was expected to follow in his footsteps without question. A raindrop fell on his hand, then another. The sky was darkening, but Jason didn't care. Maybe the rain would hide his tears. "Why?" he murmured to himself, running his hands over his face. "What am I doing with my life?" The truth was simple and painful. He no longer recognized himself. The mirror showed a stranger with deep, dark circles under his eyes and a forced smile. His decisions weren't his own. His dreams had been replaced by his father's plans. Even his fiancée, Elizabeth, seemed more interested in the Miller surname than in him. The rain intensified but remained light. A few passers-by quickened their pace, opening colorful umbrellas. Jason remained motionless. He felt invisible, as if the world spun around him without noticing him. That's when he noticed movement nearby. Small footsteps. A child. A girl of about 5 years old was approaching. She wore a worn red coat, stained at the elbows, and a wool hat that partially covered her light hair. In her small hands, she held a daisy. A simple flower, white with a yellow center, the kind that grew on the edges of the park. She stopped in front of him, her eyes, a deep blue, fixed on his without hesitation. There was no pity in that gaze, only genuine curiosity. "Hi," she said, rocking on her heels. "Hi," Jason replied, quickly wiping away his tears with the back of his hand. The girl tilted her head as if analyzing a complex puzzle. "Why are you crying?" The question, direct and straightforward as only children can be, caught Jason by surprise. He opened his mouth to answer, but found no simple words to explain the emptiness he felt. "It's complicated," he said at last. "My mom says crying is good. It cleans you inside." Jason couldn't help but smile slightly. "Your mom sounds smart." The girl nodded seriously. "She's the smartest person in the whole wide world." For an instant, Jason's tears gave way to curiosity. Where did this child come from? Where were her parents? Her coat seemed too old, too small for her size. Her jeans had a patch on the knee. Her sneakers were worn at the toes. "What's your name?" Jason asked. "Sophie." "What's yours?" "Jason," Sophie smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. "Jason, that's a nice name." Then, without warning, she extended her hand, offering the daisy. "Here, I thought it might make you happy." The gesture, so simple yet so profound, made something inside Jason tremble. He looked at the small daisy, with its delicate white petals. In that child's hands, it was a precious gift, perhaps the most sincere he had received in years. Carefully, he took the flower. "Thank you, Sophie. That's very kind of you." She shrugged, as if to say it was nothing special. Everyone deserves a flower when they're sad. The rain was falling harder now. Sophie looked at the sky, and then at a distant point in the park. "I have to go. My mom's waiting for me." Before Jason could say anything, she had already turned around. Her small, quick steps carried her away, the red coat like a tiny flame in the gray of the rainy afternoon. "Bye, Sophie," he said, but she was already too far to hear. Jason stood there, the daisy between his fingers. A knot formed in his throat, different from what he had felt before. It wasn't despair or anger, it was something more, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The rain was now soaking his expensive suit. His phone vibrated in his pocket, probably his father, annoyed about some contract, or Elizabeth asking about dinner. It didn't matter. For the first time in years, something else occupied his thoughts. That girl, Sophie, the simplicity of her gesture, the purity of her intention, no ulterior motives, no expectation of anything in return, just a child offering a flower to a sad stranger. The contrast was stark. He, surrounded by people who measured every word, every action, calculating advantages. And there was a child who, with nothing but a daisy picked in the park, offered solace. Jason carefully placed the daisy in the inside pocket of his jacket, protecting it from the rain. He stood up and looked in the direction Sophie had gone. He could no longer see her. Who was that girl? Where did she come from? Why was she alone in the park? Her coat seemed so old. And where was her mother? The questions multiplied in his mind as he walked slowly in the rain. His phone kept vibrating, but he didn't answer. Dinner with his father, Elizabeth's expectations, tomorrow's meetings. Everything seemed less urgent now. Jason reached his car, a gleaming black German sedan. He got in and sat still, looking through the windshield as the wipers worked in rhythm with the rain. He took the flower from his pocket, so fragile, yet somehow powerful. Something in that simple gesture had touched a forgotten part of him, a part buried by years of expectations, obligations, and appearances. Here. I thought it might make you happy. Simple words. So simple. Jason started the engine, but didn't drive home. He circled the park, slowing down as he looked for a red coat among the passers-by. Nothing. Sophie had vanished as suddenly as she appeared. With a sigh, Jason continued on his way. But something had changed. The feeling of emptiness was still there, but now it had company. A curiosity, a questioning. How could such a small child possess so much wisdom? How could such a simple gesture carry so much meaning? And more importantly, what did it say about his own life that a gratuitous act of kindness had left him so disoriented? Jason diverted his path and didn't go home. He needed to think, and for the first time in a long time, he wanted to think for himself, not following the script others had written for him. The image of Sophie wouldn't leave his mind. Those honest, direct blue eyes, that simple, beautiful daisy. On that rainy afternoon, something had changed. Jason didn't yet know what or how, but he felt that this encounter, so brief, so simple, was not by chance. And he decided he would return to that park the next day. Jason barely slept that night. The image of little Sophie in her worn red coat and the daisy in her hand wouldn't leave his mind. He cancelled dinner with his father, ignored Elizabeth's calls, and spent hours staring at the ceiling of his luxurious apartment, the flower carefully placed in a glass of water on his nightstand. The next morning, he sent an email to his secretary cancelling all meetings. Urgent personal matter, he wrote, not caring about the lie. He needed to go back to that park. He needed to see if he would find Sophie again. He chose simpler clothes. Jeans, a t-shirt, a light jacket. He left his Rolex at home, took the less flashy car he owned, a grey Ford he rarely used, and drove to the park. The sky was clear, unlike the previous afternoon, and the autumn sun was warm without being hot. Jason parked and walked to the same bench. He sat down and waited, feeling an anxiety he hadn't experienced in years. What if she didn't come? What if yesterday's encounter had been unique, unrepeatable? An hour passed. People came and went. Elderly people with their dogs, mothers with strollers, executives with takeout coffee. No sign of Sophie. Just as he was about to give up, he saw a flash of red among the trees. There she was, in the same coat, the same wool hat. She walked slowly, looking at the ground as if searching for something important. Jason felt an inexplicable relief. He stood up but hesitated. He didn't want to scare her. "Sophie," he called Han when she was close enough. The girl looked up. For a moment, she seemed not to recognize him. Then a smile lit up her face, showing the gap where her tooth was missing. "Jason!" she exclaimed, running towards him. "You came back!" There was such genuine joy in her voice that Jason felt a squeeze in his chest. "I came back," he confirmed, smiling. "I wanted to thank you for the flower." Sophie shook her head, still smiling. "Did the flower make you happy?" "It did. Very happy." "I knew it," she said, as if she had just proven a complex theory. "When someone's sad, a flower always helps." Jason gestured to the bench. "Can I sit with you for a bit?" Sophie nodded, skipping to the bench. She sat down and swung her legs, which barely reached the ground. Jason sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "What are you doing here again?" she asked. Jason hesitated. What was he doing there, really? "I wanted to see if I'd find you." "Why?" "Because I liked talking to you yesterday." Sophie seemed to consider the answer. "You're not crying anymore today," she observed. "No, I'm better today." "It was the flower," she stated with conviction. Jason smiled. "It must have been. Do you always come here in the afternoon?" Sophie suddenly grew serious, as if she was evaluating whether she should trust him. Her blue eyes examined Jason's face with an intensity that seemed far beyond her 5 years. "I come here when Mom goes out looking for work," she finally said. "She doesn't like me to be alone. There. But she can't take me with her either." "And where is there?" Jason asked carefully. Sophie looked at her own hands, then at the ground. "We used to live in a house, but they made us leave. Now we sleep under the bridge." The words, spoken so naturally, hit Jason like a punch. Under the bridge, a 5-year-old child living on the streets. He tried to keep his face neutral, but his stomach clenched. How could this reality exist just a few miles from his penthouse apartment? "I see," he said, though he understood nothing. "And have you been sleeping there for long?" 3 moons, Sophie replied, as if counting in her own unit of time. "At first I was scared of the car noises above. Now I'm used to it, and Mom says it's only for a little while." Jason nodded, not knowing what to say. The contrast between the situation she described and the calm with which she spoke was unsettling. "So is your mum looking for work now?" "Yes. She goes to many places every day. She says she'll get one, but it's hard." A silence settled between them. Jason observed Sophie. Despite her worn clothes, she was clean. Her hair, even partially hidden by her hat, seemed combed. Her nails trimmed. Someone was taking care of her with what they had available. "Sophie," Jason said, making a sudden decision, "have you had lunch today?" The girl shook her head no. "No, but I'm not very hungry." Her stomach rumbled at that exact moment, contradicting her words. Sophie covered her belly with her hands, as if trying to silence it, and gave an embarrassed giggle. "I think my stomach disagrees," Jason said, smiling. "How about we go get something to eat?" Sophie's eyes widened. "Like a real restaurant?" "Yes, a real restaurant, or wherever you prefer." Sophie bit her lip, thoughtfully. "There's a diner over there," she pointed to the other side of the park. "Sometimes I watch people eating there. Then let's go there." As they walked, Sophie skipped beside Jason, holding his hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He noticed that her sneakers were not only worn, but had a hole near her big toe. How did a mother and daughter end up living under a bridge? What had happened to them? The diner was simple but clean. A few tables outside, a long counter with high stools, the smell of fresh coffee and newly baked bread. It wasn't the kind of place Jason frequented, but at that moment, it seemed perfect. They sat at a table near the window. Sophie climbed onto the chair and knelt to reach the proper height. Her eyes scanned the room with fascination. "What would you like to eat?" Jason asked. Sophie shrugged. "I don't know. What do they have?" Jason picked up the menu and placed it in front of her. Lots of things. Sandwiches, pies, milkshakes. "Milkshake?" Sophie's eyes lit up. "I've never had one." "Never." Jason couldn't hide his surprise. "Then today's a good day to try one. What flavor would you like?" "Do they have strawberry?" Of course. When the waitress approached, Jason ordered a strawberry milkshake, a sandwich and fries for Sophie. For himself, just a coffee. Aren't you going to eat? Sophie asked, curious. I'm not hungry, but I'll try some of your milkshake if you let me. Sophie nodded solemnly. I'll share. While they waited, Sophie told him more about her life. She had just turned 5. Before they went to the under the bridge, they lived in a small apartment. But her mother lost her job when the school where she worked closed. Without money for rent, they were evicted. They tried to stay in a shelter, but Sophie explained that there were too many people there and some people were mean. Mommy says it's better if we stay alone until she gets a new job, Sophie concluded. She says we'll have a house again soon. Jason listened, feeling a mixture of admiration and indignation. Admiration for the resilience of that child, who spoke about her precarious situation without self-pity. Indignation that, in such a wealthy society, a mother and daughter could end up living under a bridge. When the food arrived, Sophie's eyes almost popped out. The milkshake was large, with whipped cream on top and a cherry. The sandwich, generous. The fries, crispy and golden. She looked at Jason as if asking for permission. Go ahead and eat, he said, smiling. Sophie picked up the straw and took her first sip of the milkshake. Her expression transformed into pure delight. It's the best thing I've ever tasted, she exclaimed. Try it, Jason. He accepted the straw she offered and pretended to take a sip. Truly delicious. Sophie ate enthusiastically, but Jason noticed that after eating half the sandwich and a few fries, she stopped and asked to wrap up the rest. Are you full? He asked. A little. I want to take the rest to Mom. Jason felt his heart clench. Even amidst her own hunger, Sophie's first thought was to share with her mother. Of course. Let's ask them to wrap it up. When the waitress returned, Jason asked not only for the leftovers to be wrapped, but also another sandwich and a salad to go. Sophie looked at him with silent gratitude. Thank you, she said as they left the diner, carrying the bag with the food. Mommy will be happy. I hope so, Jason replied. Sophie, can I ask you something? What? How does your mom manage? He hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question. How do you get by without a home? Sophie shrugged. We shower in the train station bathroom. Mommy washes our clothes at night, when no one's looking. She always says being poor isn't an excuse to be dirty. They walked back to the park. The sun began to set, painting the sky with orange hues. I have to go, Sophie said, clutching the bag to her chest. Mommy will worry if I'm late. I understand. Jason hesitated. Sophie, I think I should take you home. I mean, to the bridge. It's getting late. Sophie shook her head. No need. I know the way. And Mommy doesn't like strangers to know where we stay. Of course, sorry. Jason respected her decision, but felt a pang in his chest, imagining that child walking alone through the city. Can I come back tomorrow? He asked. I'll bring more food if you want. Sophie's face lit up. You can. I'll wait for you here. It's a deal. Sophie walked away a few steps, then stopped and ran back. Without warning, she hugged Jason's legs. Thank you for the milkshake. Before he could reply, she had already turned and was running down the path leading out of the park, the bag of food swinging in her small hand. Jason stood still, watching until the figure in the red coat disappeared into the distance. Something had shifted inside him, an unsettling certainty that he couldn't simply go back to his normal life, pretending he didn't know what he now knew. The next day, Jason cancelled his meetings again. He bought food, light blankets, some new children's books, and a colorful backpack. He arrived at the park earlier and waited, anxious. Sophie appeared punctually, as if they had made an appointment. Her face lit up when she saw him. You really came, she exclaimed, running to him. Of course I did. I promised, didn't I? They sat on the same bench. Sophie recounted that her mother loved the sandwich, that it was the best dinner in a long time. Jason listened, handed over the gifts, and watched the joy in the girl's eyes when she saw the new books. Are these for me? She asked, incredulous. They are. You said you like stories. Sophie hugged the books to her chest. Thank you, thank you, thank you. They spent the afternoon leafing through the books. Jason read some stories aloud, while Sophie listened with absolute attention. Again, they went to the diner. Again, Sophie saved half the food to take to her mother. On the third day, Jason brought more supplies, warm clothes, new socks, a small flashlight, hygiene products. Sophie accepted everything with a gratitude that made Jason feel both useful and inadequate. What were these small gestures in the face of the reality she faced? On the fourth day, it was raining. Jason imagined Sophie wouldn't come, but she appeared anyway. Her red coat soaked, her hair dripping under her wool hat. "You're drenched," Jason exclaimed, taking off his own coat to cover her. "It's nothing," she said, smiling. "I like rain." He immediately took her to the diner. He ordered hot chocolate to warm her up. While they drank their beverages, Sophie was quieter than usual. "Is everything okay?" Jason asked. Sophie looked at her cup. "Mommy's sick." "Sick? What's wrong with her?" "She coughs a lot, and she's hot." Sophie looked up. "She says it's just a cold. But it's been like this since yesterday." Jason felt an immediate concern. "Did she see a doctor?" Sophie shook her head. "No. We don't have money for a doctor. She said she'll get better on her own." "Sophie, this is serious. Your mum needs care." "I know." Her eyes filled with tears. "I try to take care of her, but I don't know how." Jason thought quickly. He couldn't just show up where they lived with a doctor. Sophie's mother would likely refuse help from a stranger. He needed to earn her trust first. "Sophie, I think, I want to meet your mom," he finally said. "And maybe I can help you both in some way." Sophie stared at him for a long moment, assessing the proposal. Then she nodded slowly. "She's too sick to look for work today. She's down under the bridge." "Can we go there?" "She doesn't like strangers to know where we sleep. She says it's dangerous." "I understand." And he truly did. A woman alone with a child, living on the streets, needed to be cautious. Sophie bit her lip thoughtfully. Then, as if making a big decision, she said, "Mommy says she's not hungry and lets me eat the bread, but I know it's a lie. Yesterday she didn't even eat anything. She said she saved it all for me." Jason's heart ached. A mother starving herself to feed her daughter. Sophie continued, "She needs medicine and food and rest." Her blue eyes fixed on Jason with impressive intensity. "Can you help?" "I can. I want to help." "Then I'll take you there." Jason hesitated. "Are you sure? I don't want to cause you any trouble." "You're my friend," Sophie declared simply. "And Mommy needs friends too." She stood up and extended her small hand to Jason. He took it, feeling a strange emotion, a mix of gratitude and responsibility. "Shall we go now?" he asked. Sophie nodded. "Let's go." "It's a bit far, but I know the way." Before they left, Jason bought more food to go, including a hot soup, tea, and some basic flu medicine from the nearby pharmacy. Sophie waited patiently, holding his hand as if she feared he might change his mind. They started walking, leaving the park behind. Sophie held Jason's hand confidently, guiding him through less busy streets. They didn't talk much now. Jason felt the weight of the situation, the responsibility of entering Sophie and her mother's world. As they walked, he thought about what he would say, how he would introduce himself, what he could offer. He didn't want to seem condescending. He didn't want the help to seem like charity or, worse, to have ulterior motives. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained grey. The streets became less and less busy as they went. They passed old buildings, closed shops, broken sidewalks, a world just a few miles from the financial district where Jason worked, but which seemed to be on another planet. Sophie interrupted his thoughts. "Say, it's just over there," she said, pointing to a bridge crossing a small river. "We stay underneath." Jason looked at the bridge in the distance. Cars passed overhead, oblivious to the fact that, meters below, people lived, slept, dreamed. People like Sophie and her mother. They descended a dirt path muddy from the recent rain. Sophie walked with the ease of someone who knew the terrain well, while Jason tried to keep his balance. They passed tall bushes, then a broken fence. "It's here," Sophie finally said. Under the bridge, protected from the rain but not the dampness, was a small makeshift camp. Cardboard boxes served as walls. Thin blankets were spread on the ground. A worn backpack, some plastic containers, carefully folded clothes. Everything extremely organized, considering the circumstances. In one corner, lying on a pile of blankets, was a woman. Even from a distance, Jason could hear her difficult breathing, interrupted by fits of coughing. "Mommy," Sophie called softly, approaching. "I brought a friend. He wants to help." The woman turned with difficulty. Her hair was light like Sophie's, but pulled back in a messy bun, her face pale and tired, her eyes feverish. Jason stepped forward, preparing to introduce himself. That's when the dim light filtering through the sides of the bridge better illuminated the woman's face. He froze. He knew that face. He knew those eyes. "Claire?" The name came out as an incredulous whisper. The woman blinked several times as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Jason!" Her voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "Is that really you?" Sophie looked from one to the other, confused. "Do you know each other?" Neither of them replied. The past had just collided with the present, under the cold, damp structure of a bridge. The world stopped. There, under the damp, cold bridge, time froze. Cars continued to pass overhead. The river flowed below, but between Jason and Claire, everything was suspended. Claire rose with difficulty, leaning on one elbow. Her face, already pale from fever, completely lost its color. Her blue eyes, identical to Sophie's, widened in shock and disbelief. "Jason," she repeated, her voice weak. "It can't be." Jason remained motionless, unable to process what he was seeing. Claire Bennett, the same Claire who had disappeared from his life 6 years ago without a trace. The same Claire whose smile still occasionally visited his dreams. The same Claire who swore eternal love that summer night. So long ago. Now here, sick, sheltered under a bridge. The words died in his throat. Claire pulled the thin blanket closer to her body, in an instinctive gesture of protection. Her hands trembled, not just from the fever. "You shouldn't be here," she said, looking away. The shame was palpable in her voice. How did you—" Sophie looked from one to the other, confused. Her small hand still held Jason's, but her eyes were now fixed on her mother. "Mommy, this is Jason, my friend I told you about." "From the park." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to organize her thoughts through the fog of fever. "Sophie, come here," she asked, extending her hand to her daughter. The girl hesitated, then let go of Jason's hand and ran to her mother. Claire hugged her protectively, looking at Jason over her daughter's head. There was fear in her eyes, and something more, something Jason couldn't name. "Do you know my mommy?" Sophie asked, turning to Jason. He swallowed hard, not knowing what to answer, what to tell a child about a past he himself barely understood. "Yes," he finally said. "I knew your mother, a long time ago." A coughing fit shook Claire's body. Sophie immediately turned to help her, reaching for a half-empty water bottle. "Here, Mommy, drink some." Claire accepted the water, drinking with difficulty. Jason noticed how thin her hands were, her fingers slender, her nails colorless. He noticed the deep dark circles under her eyes, her dull hair, the clothes that seemed too big for her fragile body. And yet, it was Claire. The same Claire who laughed with her head thrown back when something truly amused her. The same Claire who recited poetry under the stars on the rooftop of his college apartment building. The same Claire who swore eternal love that summer night, so long ago. "I brought medicine," Jason said, lifting the bag. His voice sounded strange, distant. "And food, soup. It's still warm." Claire didn't reply. She kept looking at him as if she were seeing a ghost. "Mommy needs medicine," Sophie interjected. "She's very hot." The instinct to help momentarily overcame the shock. Jason approached and knelt, placing the bags on the ground near Claire. He maintained a respectful distance, but close enough for her to reach the items. Painkillers, fever reducers, cough syrup. He named them as he took the items out of the bag. And food. I thought, well, you'd need it. Claire remained silent, looking alternately at Jason and the medicine. Distrust battled against necessity on her face. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice almost inaudible. Jason nodded, still unable to organize his thoughts. How had Claire ended up in this situation? What had happened to her after she disappeared? And Sophie. The girl took the soup container and carefully opened it. Steam rose into the cold air under the bridge. "Look, Mommy, warm soup. It'll make you feel better." Claire looked at her daughter with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you, dear." "Jason bought it," Sophie said, proudly. "He buys yummy things." Claire's gaze met Jason's again. There was a whirlwind of emotions there, impossible to fully decipher. Gratitude, shame, confusion, fear. "You've been kind to my daughter," Claire said, choosing her words carefully. "She was kind to me first," Jason replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "She gave me a flower when I needed it." An uncomfortable silence settled. Sophie, oblivious to the tension, arranged the soup in a small makeshift plastic container. "How?" Jason began, but stopped. There were so many questions, so many things he wanted to know. But the moment wasn't appropriate. Claire was sick, vulnerable. This wasn't the setting for a confrontation about the past. "You don't have to say anything," Claire interrupted, as if reading his thoughts. "Not now." Jason nodded, understanding. The past would have to wait. "You need a doctor," he said instead, looking at Claire's feverish face. "I'm fine, it's just a cold." "It doesn't look like just a cold. You have a high fever, Claire, and that cough." "Mommy worked in the rain the day before yesterday," Sophie informed, still busy with the soup, handing out flyers. Jason felt a tightening in his chest. The image of Claire, the brilliant literature student he had known, handing out flyers in the rain was too painful to contemplate. "Let me help," he pleaded, his voice softer now. "I can take you to a hospital. I can—" "No." The answer was quick and firm, despite her weak voice. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity, Claire. It's—" "What? What was it?" "Obligation, guilt." He still couldn't name what he felt at that moment. He only knew he couldn't just turn his back and walk away. "Mommy, Jason's nice," Sophie insisted, offering the soup to her mother. "He tells pretty stories." A slight smile appeared on Claire's tired face. "He always was good with words," she murmured, more to herself than to others. The memory hit Jason like a wave. Claire, sitting on the campus lawn, laughing as he tried to improvise a poem. "You're terrible with words," she would say. "But I love you anyway." The past was there, between them, as present as the cars passing over the bridge, as real as the dampness seeping through their clothes, as inescapable as the river flowing meters below. "I'll let you eat in peace," Jason said, standing up. The situation was too overwhelming. I'll come back tomorrow, if you allow it, to see how you're doing." Claire didn't reply immediately. She took the soup Sophie offered and took a small sip, as if she needed time to think. "Why?" she finally asked. Why would you do this?" The question contained 6 years of silence, 6 years of absence, 6 years of unanswered questions. "Because Sophie helped me when I needed it," Jason replied. It was true, though not the whole truth. "And because you need help now." Claire studied his face for a long moment, then, slowly, she nodded. "All right," she said, her voice a little firmer. "But I don't want to talk about before. Not now." "I understand. I'll respect that." Jason looked at Sophie, who was observing the conversation with curiosity. "I'll be back tomorrow, Sophie, I promise." "Will you bring more stories?" the girl asked, her face lighting up. "Of course, as many as you want." Claire watched the interaction with a complex expression, as if trying to solve a difficult puzzle. "Until tomorrow," Then, Jason said, addressing them both. Then, looking directly at Claire, he added, "If you need anything before that, anything at all." He took a card from his pocket and placed it on top of one of the bags. "Boy, my number hasn't changed," he said, knowing she would understand the implication, that all those years, part of him still hoped she would call. Claire didn't reply, but her eyes fixed on the card for a moment before returning to the soup. Jason left that place feeling as if he were walking in a dream. With each step away from the bridge, the reality of what he had just discovered hit him harder. Claire, Sophie, a bridge, a past he had never truly left behind. In the days that followed, Jason established a routine. In the mornings, he sent excuses to the office. Urgent personal matter, he now said. In the afternoons, he brought supplies for Claire and Sophie. Food, warmer blankets, medicine, children's books. His car, once used only for trips from his penthouse to the office, now knew the way to the bridge well. Claire gradually improved. The fever subsided, the cough diminished, but the discomfort between them remained, an invisible barrier erected by time and silence. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't mention college, shared dreams, the plans they made. They didn't touch on the subject of Claire's sudden disappearance, the hundreds of unanswered calls, the fruitless searches. They talked about the present, about immediate needs, about Sophie. The girl blossomed with Jason's attention. Each new book was received with enthusiasm. Each story listened to with fascination. She served as a bridge between the two adults who could barely look each other in the eye. "Mommy's been different since you showed up," Sophie commented one afternoon, while Jason read to her under the bridge. Claire had gone out to look for work, leaving them alone after much hesitation. Jason closed the book, surprised by the observation. "Different how?" Sophie tilted her head thoughtfully, quieter, but also more hopeful. She pronounced the last word carefully, as if repeating something she had heard. "She smiles more when she thinks I'm not looking." Jason didn't know how to respond. The child's keen perception surprised him. "That's good, isn't it?" Sophie asked, worried by his silence. "Yes, it's good," he replied, smiling slightly. "Hope is always good." When Claire returned that afternoon, she looked exhausted. Another fruitless job search. Another closed door. Another, "We're sorry, but we have no openings at this time." "Nothing?" Jason asked softly, as Sophie played with some improvised toys he had brought. Claire shook her head, sitting heavily on the blanket. "Nothing. I tried 3 places today. One of them said they'd call me, but..." She shrugged, the gesture conveying years of disappointments. Jason took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Claire, I want to help, really." "You're already helping," she replied, gesturing to the supplies around them. "More than you should." "It's not enough," Jason insisted. "You can't keep living here. Winter is coming. Sophie needs..." "Do you think I don't know that?" Claire interrupted, her voice tense. "Do you think I don't think about it every minute of every day?" Jason recoiled, realizing his mistake. "Sorry, I didn't mean..." "I know," Claire sighed, running a hand over her tired face. "I know your intentions are good, but understand, Jason, it's not that simple." "What's not simple?" "Accepting help. From you, especially." The past lurked between the lines of that conversation, a past they were both determined not to mention. "I have a vacant apartment," Jason said, deciding to take a risk. "It was my grandfather's. It's been empty for years. You could..." "No," Claire cut him off. "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "It's just a roof, Claire. A safe place for Sophie." The mention of her daughter hit Claire. She looked at Sophie, who was building and unbuilding a small tower with colorful blocks Jason had brought, oblivious to the tense adult conversation. "She deserves better," Claire murmured. "She deserves so much more than this." "Then let me help," Jason insisted. "Not for you. Not for me. For her." Claire looked long at Sophie, then at the small space they had made into a home in recent months. The blankets, the boxes, the few belongings meticulously organized. All so precarious, so temporary. "I need to think," she finally said. It was more than a no, it was an opening, however small. "Of course," Jason replied. No rush? They sat in silence watching Sophie play. The evening light filtered through the sides of the bridge, creating golden patterns on the concrete floor. Jason, Claire said after a few minutes. Her voice was different now, softer. Thank you for everything you've done for Sophie. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. She looked up. You had no obligation. Perhaps not, but I wanted to. A small smile appeared on Claire's face, the first he had seen since their reunion. Fragile, hesitant, but a smile. I'll think about your offer, she said, carefully. Jason nodded, feeling that something had changed, a small crack in the wall that separated them. And that's all I ask. The past was still there, heavy and unresolved between them, but for the first time, Jason felt that perhaps there was a way forward, uncertain, difficult, but a way. And for now, that was enough. 3 weeks passed since the reunion under the bridge. Autumn was advancing, the nights were getting colder, and Jason's concern for Claire and Sophie's situation grew with each passing day. The small makeshift shelter under the concrete structure would not withstand the approaching winter. On a particularly cold afternoon, Jason arrived with more blankets and warm food. He found Claire trying to warm Sophie's hands, which were red from the cold. This can't go on, he said, unable to hide his concern. You need a proper place. Claire didn't reply immediately. In recent days, she had become more receptive to Jason's presence, though she still maintained an emotional distance. The past remained forbidden territory between them. We've talked about this, she finally said, as Sophie ran to hug Jason. Yes, we have, and my offer still stands. Jason knelt down to Sophie's height. Hey, little one, I brought hot chocolate. The girl's face lit up. With marshmallows? Of course. What hot chocolate would be without marshmallows? While Sophie savored her drink, Jason and Claire stepped a few paces away. Winter is coming, Claire, he insisted. Temperatures will drop even further in the coming weeks. Think of Sophie. It was as if the mention of her daughter's name broke something inside Claire. She looked at the girl, then at the grey sky visible through the sides of the bridge. And then what happens? She asked, her voice low. We move into your empty apartment, and then what? Do we become dependent on you forever? That's not what I'm proposing. Then what exactly are you proposing? Jason took a deep breath. He had thought about this a lot in recent days. A fresh start, for both of you. Claire crossed her arms, not in defiance, but as if to protect herself. A fresh start, how? The apartment is just the beginning, Jason chose his words carefully. I have a proposition, a job, at Miller and Associates. Claire's eyes widened. A job? For me? Yes, in the administrative department. We need someone organized, detail-oriented, someone with a good education. Jason, Claire hesitated. It's been years since I worked formally. My resume has a huge gap. That doesn't matter. I know your capabilities. Claire looked away, visibly conflicted. Why would you do that? Why do you care? It was the question that had hovered between them since their reunion. Jason could have given many answers. Because he felt responsible, because guilt consumed him, because he had never truly forgotten her. But the truth was simpler. Because Sophie showed me that there are still things that matter, he replied. And because you both deserve a chance. Claire remained silent for a long moment, looking at her daughter. Sophie had chocolate around her mouth and was laughing as she told Jason about a squirrel she had seen that morning. All right, Claire finally said, her voice almost a whisper. I accept. For Sophie. The relief Jason felt was immense. And we can move in this weekend, Claire continued. And as for the job, I'll try. I don't promise I'll be good, but I'll try. That's all I ask. When they told Sophie they were moving into a real house, the girl's reaction was unexpected. Instead of jumping for joy, she seemed worried. But what about our things? She asked, looking at the few belongings meticulously organized around their space under the bridge. We'll take everything, Claire assured her, stroking her hair. And can I take my books, the ones Jason gave me? Every single one of them. Sophie considered for a moment, then smiled. Are we going to have a real shower? Claire couldn't hold back her tears. Yes, sweetie, a real shower. The weekend arrived quickly. Jason helped with the move, which was simple and fast. All of Claire and Sophie's belongings fit into a few bags. The apartment, located in a quiet neighborhood, wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and welcoming. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a functional kitchen. Sophie ran from room to room, amazed by the space. When she discovered she would have a room all to herself, she was paralyzed with emotion. A whole bed? Just for me? Claire hugged her tightly. Just for you, my love. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's excitement, Claire and Jason sat in the small living room. The silence between them was different now, less tense, more contemplative. Thank you, Claire said, looking at her own hands. It's a relief. Not to be on the streets anymore. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. She looked up. You changed our lives. Jason shook his head. Sophie changed mine first. The following weeks brought significant changes. Claire started working at Miller & Associates, initially part-time so she could be with Sophie after school. The adjustment wasn't easy. The corporate environment was intimidating after years of instability, but her intelligence and determination soon stood out. Sophie was enrolled in a nearby school. At first, she was apprehensive, but she soon made friends. Her new clothes, her colorful backpack, and the certainty of having a home to return to did wonders for her self-confidence. The effects of stability were visible. Sophie ate better, slept soundly, smiled more. Her cheeks gained color. Her eyes sparkled. Every small achievement, tying her shoelaces alone, learning a new letter, drawing a picture, was celebrated as a great victory. Jason visited them regularly. He always brought new books for Sophie, who devoured the stories with increasing enthusiasm. During these visits, something strange began to happen. The more he observed Sophie, the more Jason saw familiar characteristics in her gestures, in the way she furrowed her brow when concentrating, in the way she tilted her head when curious. She has your stubbornness, Claire commented one evening, after Sophie insisted on finishing a difficult puzzle even after bedtime. Jason smiled, feeling an inexplicable warmth in his chest. And your intelligence, he replied. It was more than a casual observation. Something profound was changing inside Jason. The priorities that once guided his life, status, money, his father's approval, seemed empty compared to the joy he felt watching Sophie grow and flourish. The man who had cried alone in a park weeks ago had transformed. It wasn't a visible or spectacular change. It was quiet, gradual, but undeniable, as if parts of him that had been dormant had awakened. The daisy Sophie had given him on that rainy day, now dry and carefully preserved between the pages of a book, had planted something more than a gesture of kindness. It had planted a purpose. Jason was focused on the reports on his desk when his office door opened without warning. Robert Miller stormed in, his impeccable suit contrasting with his disheveled expression. Behind him, Jason's secretary appeared distressed. I'm so sorry, Mr. Miller. Your father insisted on coming in. Jason made a reassuring gesture to his secretary. It's okay, Sandra. You can leave us. The door closed, and silence hung heavy for a few seconds before Robert exploded. What the hell is wrong with you? His deep voice echoed through the office walls. Claire Bennett, working in my company. Jason remained calm, though his heart raced. He knew this moment would come. It was inevitable in a company where his father still controlled the strings. Good morning to you too, Dad, he replied, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Care to sit? I don't want to sit. Robert slammed his palm on the desk. I want an explanation. Now. Jason took a deep breath. In recent weeks, he had purposely avoided his father. He had cancelled dinners, reduced his presence at board meetings, limited contact to the bare minimum. He knew Robert would eventually notice, but he hoped to have more time before the confrontation. Claire has been in the administrative department for almost a month. She's doing an excellent job. I don't care if she's doing an excellent or terrible job. What I care about is why my son, my only son, hired that. Robert paused, as if searching for the right word, but decided not to complete the sentence. What is she doing here? We needed someone qualified. Claire has the right background. Robert let out a dry, humorless laugh. Don't insult my intelligence, Jason. She disappeared from your life 6 years ago, vanished without a trace, and now, coincidentally, she reappears and you hire her. He leaned over the desk, bringing his face closer to his son's. What does she want? She doesn't want anything, Jason countered, his voice firmer now. She was struggling, I helped her. It's as simple as that. Simple, Robert scoffed. Nothing is simple when it comes to that woman. Never was. There was something in the way his father spoke about Claire that deeply bothered Jason. A disdain that seemed too personal, too specific. What do you have against her, anyway? He asked, studying his father's reaction. You never really knew her. A strange gleam passed through Robert's eyes. I know enough. I know the type. Comes from nowhere, no connections, no background, and suddenly she's involved with the heir to one of the biggest companies in the city. He shook his head. You were too naive to see it. But I wasn't. Jason felt growing irritation. Claire never cared about money or status. They all say that, Robert retorted with disdain. And you believed it, like a lovesick schoolboy. Jason stood up, facing his father. That's not how it is. Claire is... She came back to ruin your life, Robert interrupted, his voice cutting. First, she emotionally ensnares you. Then she asks for a job, then a raise, then a promotion. Then come the bigger demands, maybe even a board position to compensate for the hard years she went through. Jason shook his head, incredulous at his father's cynicism. You don't know what you're talking about. Claire was in a terrible situation when I found her, homeless, jobless. Robert made a dismissive gesture. Touching story. Probably rehearsed to hit you exactly where you're most vulnerable. Your soft heart has always been your weakness. My soft heart, as you call it, is what prevents me from becoming you. The words came out before Jason could stop them. Robert's face hardened. What does that mean? It means there's more to life than spreadsheets, contracts, and profit margins. There are people, Dad, real people with real lives, facing real difficulties. Robert crossed his arms, studying his son as if seeing him for the first time. She's already poisoned you, from what I see. How long did it take? 2, 3 weeks? Don't be ridiculous. I see the same look as 6 years ago, the same blindness. Robert shook his head in disapproval. That woman is poison to you, Jason, always has been. You don't know her, Jason defended. You never gave her a chance. Didn't need to. I saw enough to know she wasn't right for you, for our family, for Miller and Associates. Something in the way Robert spoke sparked a suspicion in Jason, a doubt that had been dormant for years. It was you, he said, his voice low. 6 years ago, when Claire disappeared. You had something to do with it, didn't you? Robert's brief silence was more revealing than any answer. I did what was necessary. For your sake, for the company's sake. The office seemed to spin around Jason. Memories flashed back. Claire suddenly disappearing, without explanation. The unanswered calls, the desperate search, the pain that had consumed him for months, years. What did you do? He asked, his voice almost unrecognizable. What any father would do. Robert adjusted his jacket, unperturbed. I protected your future from an opportunist. How? I offered her a choice. To leave your life or watch your future be compromised. I explained that you had a legacy to uphold, that you needed someone of your social standing, someone who understood our world. Robert spoke as if discussing a business strategy. She made the right choice, at that time. Now she's back, obviously realizing what she lost. Jason felt a rage he had never experienced before. Back then, I was young. You decided everything for me. His voice was controlled but heavy with emotion. But not anymore. You're making the same mistake, Robert insisted. Only now the consequences will be worse. You have responsibilities, a position to maintain. She never asked for anything. I was the one who offered help. I was the one who insisted. And that's exactly how it starts. Robert raised his voice. First she reluctantly accepts, then she becomes indispensable, and before you know it, she'll be controlling you, the company, everything we've built. Get out of my office, Jason said, standing up. The resolve in his voice surprised even himself. Jason, get out. Now, Robert hesitated, surprised by the firmness in his son's voice. You're not thinking clearly. For the first time in years, I'm thinking with absolute clarity, Jason retorted. You will not interfere in my life again. You will not harm Claire. Are you threatening me? Robert seemed genuinely shocked. I'm setting boundaries. Finally. The two men stared at each other, the silence laden with decades of unspoken expectations, of control disguised as guidance, of love distorted by ambition. You'll regret this, Robert finally said, heading for the door. Say when she shows her true intentions, don't say I didn't warn you. If I find out you've done anything to harm her, Jason replied, each word weighing like a stone, you'll lose a son. Robert stopped with his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, it seemed he would say something more, but he just shook his head and left, closing the door with unnecessary force. Jason collapsed into his chair, exhausted. His world had just been turned upside down. The suspicions he'd had, the doubts about the past, all now seemed to point in a terrifying direction. His own father had orchestrated Claire's disappearance. The confirmation came like a punch to the gut. For 6 years, he had carried the pain of abandonment, questioning what he had done wrong, why he wasn't enough. And all that time, his father manipulated the behind-the-scenes of his life like a corporate chess game. Jason looked out his office window at the city stretching out below. Somewhere, Claire and Sophie were rebuilding their lives, finally with some stability and security. He wouldn't allow his father to destroy that again. It was time to break the pattern, to stop being the obedient son who followed the path laid out by Robert Miller, to become the man he wanted to be, not what he was expected to be. Jason picked up the phone. There were decisions to make, truths to confront. But one thing was clear, he was determined to follow his own path, regardless of the consequences. The revelation about his father's role in Claire's disappearance tormented Jason for days. He slept poorly, worked distracted, and his visits to Claire and Sophie became more frequent, almost desperate, as if he feared they might disappear again. Claire noticed the change. She perceived his prolonged gazes, his hesitant questions, the way Jason watched Sophie with an almost painful attention. She knew the moment she dreaded was approaching. On a Friday evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Claire invited Jason for tea in the apartment's small kitchen. The silence between them was heavy with unasked questions, with unspoken truths. "You're different," Claire commented, placing the cup in front of him. "Did something happen?" Jason stared at the warm liquid, gathering his courage. "I spoke to my father," he finally said, "about you." Claire paled. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed her own cup on the table. "What did he say?" "Enough." Jason looked up to meet her eyes. "He admitted that he drove you away, that he forced you out of my life." Claire looked away, fixing her gaze on the window where night had completely fallen. "That was a long time ago." "Not for me." Jason leaned forward. "I spent 6 years wondering what I had done wrong, why you had just disappeared." "It wasn't your fault," Claire murmured. "It never was. Why didn't you tell me when we met again, when I started helping you?" Claire closed her eyes for a moment. "Shame? Fear?" She sighed. "At first I thought it would be temporary, that you would help and move on with your life. I didn't want to complicate things." "Complicate?" Jason shook his head. "Claire, I had a right to know." "I know that." Her voice was almost a whisper. Every day that passed it became harder to tell. The silence returned, heavy. Jason looked at the hallway leading to the room where Sophie was sleeping. The question that had consumed him for weeks formed on his lips. "Claire, I need to ask you something. About Sophie." Claire's body tensed. Her hands gripped the cup as if seeking support. "Jason, please." "How old is she exactly?" "5, almost 6. "And when was she born?" Claire took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep waters. "March 15th, almost 6 years ago." Jason quickly did the mental math. 6 years ago, Claire had disappeared at the end of summer. If Sophie was born in March, you were pregnant when you disappeared. It wasn't a question. Claire didn't reply. Silent tears began to form in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jason's voice was gentle but filled with pain. "Why did you hide this from me?" "Your father," Claire began, but stopped. She took a deep breath and tried again. "It wasn't that simple." "Then explain it to me." Jason leaned closer, his eyes pleading. "Hi, please, I need to understand." Claire looked at her own hands, then at the hallway as if checking if Sophie was still asleep. "I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after we broke up. Or rather, after your father convinced me to break up." "What exactly did he do?" Claire swallowed hard. "He called me to his office. Said I was too poor for you. That I was hindering your career, your future." Her voice trembled. "He said I was a burden, that you deserved someone of your caliber." Jason felt his stomach churn at his father's cruelty. "I never thought that. Never." "I know that now." Claire smiled sadly. "But back then, I was 22, Jason. I came from a poor family, studied on a scholarship. Your father was intimidating, powerful, and part of me believed him. You could have told me. We would have faced it together. He said he would ruin my life if I tried, that he would use his influence to make sure I never finished college, never got a decent job." Claire wiped away a tear. "And he said that you agreed with him? That you were looking for a way to break up with me because you had met someone more suitable?" Jason felt as if he had been punched. "And you believed it?" "I didn't want to believe it. I tried to call you that day, but you didn't answer. You were in an important meeting, according to your father." Claire swallowed hard. "Then he showed me a picture of you with Elizabeth Wellington at her company's launch cocktail. You looked close." Jason remembered the event. Elizabeth was the daughter of one of Miller and Associates' biggest investors. His father had insisted he accompany her. It had been just a business favor, but the photo, in the right context, could suggest something else. "It was manipulation," Jason said. "Pure manipulation." "I realized too late," Claire bit her lip. "When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I tried to find you, but your father intercepted. He said you didn't want to be a father, that it would ruin your plans." Jason closed his eyes, feeling nauseous. "He had no right. I was young and scared." Claire's voice faltered. "He offered me money to disappear, to not have the baby." Jason opened his eyes, horrified. "My God." "I refused the money." A shadow of pride passed over Claire's face, but I agreed to disappear. For everyone's good, I thought, so as not to complicate your life. To protect my baby from disdain. Jason reached out across the table, touching Claire's fingers lightly. "Sophie," he murmured. "Sophie is..." Claire nodded, tears now flowing freely. "She's your daughter, Jason." Although he had suspected it, although the evidence was there in Sophie's eyes, in the shape of her face, hearing the words spoken aloud was as if the world stopped spinning. Jason felt the air leave his lungs. "My daughter," he repeated, his voice broken. "I have a daughter. I'm so sorry." Claire gripped his hand tightly. "I'm so sorry I didn't fight harder, for not trusting you, for letting him separate us." Jason barely heard her. His mind was filled with images of Sophie offering him the flower in the park, Sophie laughing as he read stories, Sophie sleeping peacefully in the next room, unaware that her biological father was sitting in the kitchen, discovering her existence. 5 years, Jason murmured. "I missed 5 years of her life." "She adores you," Claire said softly, "from the very first day, as if something inside her knew." Jason could no longer contain his emotions. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Claire stood up and walked around the table, hugging him without saying a word. They stayed like that for a long time, Jason feeling the weight of all he had lost, of all his father had stolen from him. Sophie's first smile, her first steps, her first words, years of love and moments that would never return. When he finally calmed down, Jason wiped his face and looked at Claire. I need to know her. Really? As a father, I know. Are we going to tell her? Claire hesitated. I think so. When you're ready. When we both are. Jason nodded. Then a new wave of emotion hit him. Why did you come back? Why now? Claire sighed. It wasn't planned. I had a stable job, a small apartment, but the school where I worked suddenly closed. I tried to find another job, but without success. She shook her head. Our savings ran out. The landlord evicted us. We had nowhere to go. And you ended up under the bridge, Jason completed. His voice choked. Yes, the rest you know. Claire smiled faintly. Sophie finding you in the park, the flower. As if destiny was correcting a mistake, Jason murmured. For a moment, they were silent, absorbing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Then Jason stood up, walking to the window. He looked out at the city, at the lights that dotted the night. I'm going to make this right, he said, more to himself than to Claire. I'm going to be the father she deserves. I know you will. Jason turned, his face marked by tears, but his eyes determined. My father won't interfere again. I won't allow it. Jason, he's powerful and resentful. I don't care. The determination in his voice was palpable. I have something more important to protect now. Something he tried to take from me. At that moment, looking at Claire, Jason felt that everything finally made sense. The inexplicable sadness that had accompanied him for years. The emptiness that no professional success could fill. The constant feeling that something fundamental was missing from his life. Now he knew what it was. And he was determined not to lose another single day. We're going to be a family, he said, his voice firm despite the emotions. The way we should have been from the start. Claire nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and caution. One step at a time. One step at a time, Jason agreed, but in his heart he knew there was no turning back. The man in the park, crying alone on a bench, had found something far more valuable than any business success. He had found his purpose, and he was willing to fight for it with all his might. The Miller mansion stood imposing against the afternoon sky, its windows reflecting the setting sun. Jason stopped his car at the beginning of the circular driveway and took a deep breath. In recent weeks, after discovering the truth about Sophie, he had avoided this confrontation, but he could no longer postpone it. Robert Miller was in his private study, a glass of whiskey in hand, reviewing documents when his son entered without knocking. The patriarch looked up, surprised by the intrusion, but his face quickly assumed its usual impassive expression. I finally remembered you have a father, he commented, placing the glass on the table. I thought you had disappeared like your friend used to do. Jason ignored the provocation. He remained standing, refusing the silent invitation to sit. I know everything, he said simply. Robert raised an eyebrow. For everything is a very broad word, son. I know about Sophie. The brief flicker of surprise in Robert's eyes was the only indication that the statement affected him. Quickly, he regained his composure. Ah, so she finally played the card she was holding. Predictable. Claire didn't play anything. Jason kept his voice controlled, though he felt anger rising. How she told me because I deserved to know, because Sophie is my daughter. Robert let out an exaggerated sigh, as if dealing with a stubborn child. And you believed it without question, without a DNA test. Are you really that naive? I looked into her eyes. Dad. Into Sophie's eyes. I don't need tests to recognize my own daughter. Robert stood up, walking around the desk to stand face to face with his son. Jason. Jason. That woman knows exactly how to manipulate you. Always has. Why do you think she reappeared just now? Why do you think she brought this girl back into your life? She didn't bring anyone. It was a coincidence. Fate correcting your mistake. Fate, Robert laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I didn't build an empire believing in fate. I built it with calculation, strategy, and by making tough decisions when necessary. Decisions that weren't yours to make, Jason retorted, his fists clenched. Driving Claire away, hiding my daughter from me. What right did you have? Robert straightened his shoulders, his posture emanating the authority of someone who had never been questioned. The right of a father who knows the world better than his idealistic son. The right of someone who sacrificed everything to build something you would inherit without deserving it. The coldness in his words hit Jason like a physical blow. Back then I was young. You decided everything for me. Jason's voice trembled slightly, then firmed. But not anymore. You're throwing away everything I built, everything I planned for you. No, I'm choosing my own path. I'm choosing my daughter. Robert returned to his desk, taking a sip of whiskey before replying. And what do you intend to do? Form a happy little family with your college girlfriend and a child you don't even know is truly yours. Abandon everything we've built. I'm not abandoning the company. I'll continue working, being responsible, but on my terms. Your terms? Robert let out a short laugh. Do you really think it's that simple? It's not about simplicity. It's about choices. My choices. Robert studied his son for a long moment, as if truly seeing him for the first time. And what if I told you there would be consequences? That if you insist on this madness, I'll have to reconsider your position in the company, your inheritance. Jason didn't hesitate. Then reconsider. I've discovered there are more important things than the Miller name or a bank account. Robert's expression hardened. You're talking like a fool, not like my son, not like my heir. Perhaps I was never the heir you wanted. Perhaps it's time we both accepted that. Jason turned to leave, but stopped when his father spoke again. If you walk out that door now with those ideas in your head, there'll be no turning back, Jason. Think carefully about what you're doing. The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Jason stared at the man he had always feared and respected, who had shaped every aspect of his life since birth. For the first time, he didn't see the powerful Robert Miller, but just an old man clinging to control, unable to comprehend what truly mattered. Goodbye, Dad. Jason's footsteps echoed on the marble floor as he left the study, the mansion, and the future that had been planned for him without his consent. As he got into his car, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The sun had already set, but the sky still held an orange glow on the horizon. New day, new beginning. He drove towards the small apartment where Claire and Sophie were waiting for him, where his real life was just beginning, a life he had chosen for himself. Jason arrived at the apartment with a racing heart. He had spoken with Claire the night before, and together they had decided it was time. Sophie deserved to know the truth. The path wouldn't be easy. Explaining to a 5-year-old why her father had been absent for her entire life would require care and sensitivity. But after confronting Robert Miller, Jason felt capable of anything. Claire opened the door before he even knocked. Her face showed the same mix of anxiety and hope he felt. She's drawing, Claire said in a low voice, leading him inside. I told her we had something important to tell her. How did she react? Curious. She asked 1,000 questions, but I managed to deflect. In the small living room, Sophie sat on the floor, surrounded by colorful pencils and sheets of paper. When she saw Jason, her face lit up. Jason, look what I drew. She held up a paper where 3 stick figures appeared hand in hand, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one. Above, a yellow sun and several colorful flowers. It's beautiful, Sophie, Jason said, sitting on the floor beside her. His voice faltered slightly as he realized what the drawing represented. Who are these people? That's Mommy, Sophie explained, pointing to the medium figure. That's me. And that's you. Jason exchanged a look with Claire, who sat down on the other side of their daughter. Sophie, sweetie, Claire began, stroking the girl's hair. Remember I said we had something important to tell you? Sophie nodded, putting the drawing aside and looking at her mother attentively. Is it a secret? Not exactly a secret. More like a truth that has waited a long time to be told. Jason felt his throat tighten. He wanted to find the perfect words. But did they exist? How to explain to a child that her father had been absent not by choice, but by manipulation and lies? Sophie, he finally said, his voice soft. Have you ever wondered about your dad? The girl looked at the floor, then at Claire, as if asking for permission to answer. Sometimes, she admitted. Mommy said he had to go away before I was born. And that's true, Claire interjected. But it's not the whole truth. Sophie tilted her head, confused. Your dad never knew about you, Claire continued, holding her daughter's hand. He didn't know you existed until recently. Why? Because complicated things happened between us, grown-up things that made us separate before I could tell him about you. Sophie processed the information slowly, her brow furrowed in concentration. Does he know now? She finally asked. John, is he going to come visit us? Claire looked at Jason, signaling it was time. Sophie, he said, his voice choked. I've already met your dad. In fact, I am your dad. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Sophie looked at Jason, then at Claire, who nodded in confirmation, and Satis. The girl stood motionless, her blue eyes, so much like Jason's, wide with surprise. You? She finally murmured. You're my real dad. Yes, Jason replied, feeling tears form. I'm your dad, and I'm so sorry for not having been with you from the beginning. Sophie continued to stare at him, as if trying to fit this new information into her small world. You didn't know about me. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have been with you every day, every minute. Why didn't you tell him, Mommy? Sophie asked, turning to Claire. Claire took a deep breath, her eyes moist. Because I made a mistake, sweetie. I believed things that weren't true. I thought it would be better that way, but I was wrong. Sophie looked back at Jason, studying his face with surprising intensity for someone so young. Then, without warning, she moved closer to him and touched his face with her small hands, as if to confirm he was real. Your eyes are like mine, she said. Mommy always said that. Yes, Claire confirmed. You have your father's eyes. Sophie continued examining Jason's face, tracing his eyebrows, his nose, his chin. It was as if she was trying to recognize parts of herself in him, to connect with what had always been missing. I knew it, she finally whispered, a smile beginning to form on her lips. I knew you were special. You knew? Jason asked, trying to control his emotion. Sophie nodded seriously. Since that day in the park, when you were crying, I felt it here. She pointed to her own chest. Like I already knew you. Jason could no longer hold back the tears. They fell freely as Sophie, in a gesture that would change his life forever, threw her small arms around his neck. I knew you were special. Daddy? The word, so simple yet so powerful, washed over Jason like a wave. Daddy. He was a father. He was Sophie's father. The father of the most extraordinary girl he had ever met. He hugged her carefully, as if he feared she might fall apart in his arms. Over his daughter's shoulder, he saw Claire crying silently, her hands covering her mouth to muffle her sobs. Can I call you Daddy every day now? Sophie asked when she finally pulled away. Every day, Jason promised. Forever. Sophie smiled, revealing the gap where her tooth was missing. And are you going to live with us? Jason looked at Claire, whose face now showed a mixture of emotions he couldn't fully decipher. That's something your mom and I need to talk about, he replied carefully. Why? Sophie asked, childlike simplicity confronting adult complexities. Families live together. Jason gathered all the courage he had. The journey that began in that rainy park, with a flower and a kind gesture, had now reached a decisive moment. Claire, he said, extending his hand to her, shall we try to be a family? Claire hesitated only for an instant before taking his hand. "Yes," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "Let's try." Sophie clapped her hands, beaming. "We're going to be a real family." That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, exhausted from all the day's excitement, Jason and Claire sat on the apartment's small balcony. The stars sparkled in the dark sky, silent witnesses to a new beginning. "Are you sure?" Claire asked. "About us?" "I've never been so sure of anything," Jason replied. "I lost 6 years. I don't want to lose another day. It won't be easy. Your father, I've dealt with him." Jason held Claire's hand. "I chose you. I chose our family." In the weeks that followed, life completely transformed. Jason found a house in a quiet neighborhood, not far from Sophie's school. It wasn't luxurious like the mansion where he grew up, but it was cozy, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and, most importantly, a yard with space for a garden. Moving day arrived sunny, like a good omen. Sophie ran from room to room, amazed by the space that was now her home. "My room is big," she exclaimed, "and it has a window that looks out at the garden." Jason and Claire watched, smiling, as she explored every corner of the house. "I have a surprise for you," Jason said, taking Sophie's hand. "In the backyard." He led her to the back of the house, where, under the shade of a large tree, stood a small wooden playhouse, painted in bright colors, with real windows and a tiny door Sophie could easily open. "It's yours," he said, "your very own space." Sophie's eyes widened in awe. "My house. Your house inside our house," Jason explained. Sophie ran to the playhouse, opened the door and peered inside. There were colorful cushions, small shelves for her books, even a tiny table where she could draw. "It's perfect," she shouted, jumping with joy. Then, suddenly, she stopped and looked at the adults. "You can come in too whenever you want. It's our family house." Jason felt his heart swell with a love he never imagined possible. "Thank you, Sophie." In the following weeks, the garden began to come to life. Jason and Sophie planted flowers, mostly daisies, in homage to that first offer of friendship in the park. Claire cultivated aromatic herbs in small pots. Little by little, the space transformed just like them. On a Sunday afternoon, while Jason was assembling a small picnic table near Sophie's playhouse, he observed his new family. Sophie was picking flowers for an arrangement she wanted to make. Claire, sitting on a bench under the tree, watched her daughter with a serene smile. Jason approached and sat beside her. "Are you happy?" he asked. Claire watched Sophie run through the garden, stopping here and there to pick another flower, her laughter echoing through the yard. Then she looked at the house behind them, at the curtains she had sewn herself, at the photographs that were already beginning to fill the walls, new memories being created every day. "Now we have a home." "And peace," she replied, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "It's more than happiness, it's completeness." Sophie ran to them, her arms full of colorful flowers. "Come play with me," she invited, pulling both their hands. "In my playhouse." Jason and Claire let their daughter lead them, bending down to enter the small wooden structure. They sat on the tiny benches while Sophie served imaginary tea in plastic cups, chattering about fairies living among the garden flowers. It was a simple, everyday scene, but for Jason, it was a miracle. The small family that almost didn't exist now flourished like the daisies in the garden. The journey hadn't been easy. There was pain in the past, challenges in the present, uncertainties in the future. But at that moment, under the roof of the playhouse, with laughter echoing and love circulating as freely as the air they breathed, everything was perfect. The family finally blossomed. Winter approached with silent steps. The trees in the garden had already lost almost all their leaves, and the cold morning air formed small clouds of vapor when they breathed. It had been 6 months since Jason, Claire, and Sophie had moved into the house. 6 months of a new life built with care and love, day after day. Jason was covering some plants to protect them from the cold when he heard the doorbell. Claire was making hot chocolate in the kitchen, and Sophie was playing in her wooden playhouse, wrapped in a colorful coat Claire had bought with her first salary from Miller & Associates. Upon opening the door, Jason froze. Robert Miller stood on the doorstep. But it wasn't the same Robert he knew, the imposing businessman, the authoritarian patriarch. This man seemed to have aged 10 years in 6 months. He was thinner, with deep dark circles under his eyes, his posture stooped. Even his impeccable suit couldn't hide the signs of fragility. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Robert hesitated, a rare occurrence for a man accustomed to dominating every situation. "May I come in?" "I didn't come to argue." Jason hesitated, instinctively protective of his new home, but something in his father's gaze, a vulnerability never before seen, made him step aside and open the way. In the simple but cozy living room, photos of the small family decorated the walls. Sophie's drawings, carefully framed, rested on the fireplace. A real home built with affection, not ostentation. "How did you find us?" Jason asked, after they both sat down. "I still have my resources." A ghost of a smile passed over Robert's tired face. "But I'm not here to interfere." "Then why are you here?" Robert looked at his own hands, and which trembled slightly, a nervous gesture so atypical of him that Jason felt a pang of concern. "I'm sick, Jason. Cancer. Advanced. The doctors say I have 6 months, maybe less." Jason felt as if the ground had opened beneath him. Despite everything, despite the mistakes, the manipulations, the lies, it was his father. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Pride. Stubbornness." Robert shrugged. "Pick your flaw." Claire appeared at the living room door. Upon seeing Robert, she froze. Their last encounter had been 6 years ago, in a luxurious office, when he had driven her out of his son's life. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice controlled. "Claire." Robert nodded in acknowledgement. "You look well." "I am." She placed the tray on the table, hesitantly. An uncomfortable silence hung between them until Robert spoke again. "I would like to meet her. Sophie." The words surprised everyone. "If you'll allow it." Claire looked at Jason, a silent question in her eyes. "Why?" Jason asked. "Well, after everything you did, why now?" Robert took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. "I hid everything from you. Not just Claire, but my fears, my insecurities. I thought I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself." He looked at the photos on the wall. "I'm sick. I don't want to spend my last days alone. Can I meet my granddaughter?" The request hung in the air like an autumn leaf, fragile, inevitable. Jason felt the weight of years of hurt, of pain, of lost opportunities, but he also felt something more, the possibility of healing, not just for his father, but for all of them. "It's your decision too," he said to Claire. Claire studied the man who had caused her so much harm. Then she looked at Jason, at the man he had become despite everything. "Sophie deserves to meet her grandfather, even if for a short time." Jason hesitated, then nodded and went out into the garden. Sophie smiled when she saw him approach. "Daddy, look what I found." She showed him a small rock with colorful specks. "And it's beautiful," he said, bending down. "Sophie, there's someone in the house who wants to meet you." "Who?" "It's my father. Your grandpa." Sophie's eyes widened. "I have a grandpa." "Yes, he's been away for a while, but now he wants to meet you." Sophie pondered this for a moment, with the seriousness that sometimes appeared on her young face. "Is he nice? Jason hesitated. How to explain Robert Miller to a 5-year-old? He's trying to be better. Sophie nodded, accepting the answer with the simple wisdom of children. "Can I take him a present?" "Of course, if you want." Sophie looked around the winter garden. Most of the flowers had already withered, but in a corner protected by the house walls, some daisies resisted the cold. She ran over and picked one, holding it carefully. "Ready? We can go." Hand in hand, they entered the house. In the living room, Robert waited tensely. Claire watched attentively, like a silent guardian. Upon seeing Sophie, Robert straightened up. Jason noticed the exact moment his father recognized the family traits in the girl's face. "Sophie," Jason said, gently, "this is your grandfather, Robert." The girl studied the older man with the frankness of children. Then, without hesitation, she approached him and extended the daisy. "I brought this for you. It's from our garden." Robert, the man who had commanded empires, accepted the flower with trembling hands. His eyes filled with held-back tears. "Thank you. It's very beautiful." "Flowers make people happy," Sophie declared with conviction. "When I first met Daddy and he was sad, I gave him a flower and it worked." Robert looked at his son, surprised. "That's how we met," Jason explained. "Sophie found me crying in a park. She offered me a daisy. And now you're a family," Robert concluded, looking at the flower in his hand. "Thanks to a flower." "You can be part of the family too," Sophie offered, with the simplicity of innocence, "if you want." The silence that followed was delicate. Jason watched his father, now reduced to a more human version. He saw Claire, whose eyes reflected caution, but also compassion, and he saw Sophie, offering forgiveness without knowing what she was forgiving. "I would very much like that," Robert finally replied. A family was forming there, quiet, simple, and whole. Not perfect, not without scars, but alive and real. And at the center of it all, a flower, the same gesture of kindness that months earlier had begun to heal the wounds of a lonely man in a park. The flower that stayed,